Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to AtoZrunning. Hi everyone, welcome to the AtoZrunning Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andi.
And I'm Zach. And this episode is fueled by bread.
Because we love carbs here in this household. They're on the docket most every meal.
And you need to go to AtoZrunning.com and look for the word follow. And while you're there, spend a little bit of time perusing what's under the word coaching.
Yeah.
And then on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell, because then we'll send our stuff to you so you can know everything about running.
Well, that's running A to Z, right? And I should mention that a lot of people have been reaching out saying that they're doing more YouTube watching when they're on their bikes, their indoor trainers, and the treadmill. So if that's something you want to do, you want to get more of an experience here at AtoZrunning, feel free to head over to YouTube and get involved in the conversation there, but both there and on Instagram. And Corey, one of our regular listeners on YouTube, wrote this. Hot episode, Charlene was dropping diamonds.
So did she pick them back up?
She left it for all of us.
That's the kind of thing you don't want to lose.
No, and that's the great thing about dropping these kind of diamonds is that it is a wealth to share.
Absolutely was. Now, we need to spend just a few more minutes talking about Normatec and Prerace's Hypervolt. Because as you've noticed, we like the kinds of things that make us feel better as runners. And it's really important to feel as good as we can, whether we're running or not, because, you know, running hurts.
It does.
Or at least it might make us hurt for prolonged periods of time after we're running 2.5 hour long runs.
Or almost 3.
Accidentally.
No,
Accidentally.
You ran 2 hours and 52 minutes.
I wasn't supposed to. It was an accident. So we like the Hypervolt. That's the percussion massager. That's the kind of thing that basically hammers your muscles repeatedly. Yeah. And apparently that's good for them. Whether or not it's good for them, it does feel nice as long as you don't do it for too long. We're finding that it also can make you sore.
Yeah, but it makes you more mobile.
But it does that. And so as in so many instances, if you are the kind of person who likes to get that regular massage and find yourself having difficulty doing so during these times, this is a relatively decent substitute. I will never say it's as good as the real thing, but these are the kinds of things that we can use regularly to improve our condition, our situation. And then far more excitingly for us is the amount of time we have spent in the Normatec inflatable legs pants stuff every day.
They're not
2 or 3
slimming
times
pants. A day. Even though they're not slimming, they actually puff up quite a bit.
I did not say they were slimming. I don't know where you're getting that from.
I was trying to make a joke, but they are my favorite pair of pants these days.
I hope so. They're your most expensive pair of pants.
They are my most expensive pair of pants. You were right. And I have some really expensive Armani pants. These are even better. Anyway, all that to say, Normatec and Hypervice have a lot of great stuff going on.
Yes. So certainly check those things out if you're looking to up your game or help someone else up theirs by buying them a very nice gift. And that brings us to this week's topic, which is an essential topic for runners.
Nutrition. Fueling the body. So we have Meghann Featherstun coming on air talking to us about why runners need to pay attention to nutrition.
And you probably already know the answer to that because, you know, basically that's everything that your body needs is something under the umbrella of nutrition. But more importantly, we're going to really be able to break down some things here. And if you're looking for what's the practical as well as the science that backs and supports those opinions, this is the time where you're going to get a lot of that. And if you want to hear a sports nutritionist basically slap Zach in the face figuratively for his absurd
in a very nice way
nutritional habits, now's the time.
Now's the time.
Grab your popcorn or pedal a little harder if you're riding or something like that.
Well, first, we're going to talk about the world of running before we get to that nutrition topic. There has been high anticipation for the Marathon Project 2020 that will be happening on Sunday, December 20th at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this race will happen in Arizona and has so many elite athletes.
Elite marathon on U.S. soil. It's very exciting, especially exciting for those who are running it.
Yes.
Not us. But that's
we're not running it, but we're still excited,
well, yes.
Especially because we have a couple people that we're connected to that will be running in the event. I mean, we're people that we're fans of, but also people that we have had the chance to connect with. Nathan Martin, he was on a podcast episode that had to do with the Olympic trials. We'll link to that. And then, of course, Kira D'Amato, who we talk about every single week on the AtoZ Running Podcast.
She's everywhere doing everything.
And I shared a meal at the Olympic trials with Christina McKnight. She ran 2:40, so
excellent.
Super speedy. She hasn't run very many marathons, so it will be great to see how she does because she has a lot of potential in the sport.
So a lot of supreme talent going on there. Certainly names that you would recognize like Sarah Hall on the men's side, Jared Ward, and many others, both U.S. and international. And so what we're going to do is following that race, we're going to give you the lowdown on how it went, break down some great performances.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited.
Woo! Very
It's going to be
exciting.
great stuff.
All right, so that is on December 20th. And if you want to watch it, you can certainly try to tune into some of the many social media channels where people are talking about it and such. And usatf.tv will be streaming.
It will be the plus, so it does have an
Always
extra charge.
paid.
Yeah.
Assume you have to pay if you're going to watch running.
Well, I don't know because NBC also will be airing it in the evening. So you'll have to avoid looking at all the spoilers online and try to watch that. It's prime time. We'll link to how you can watch it for NBC as well.
So recently in high school running news, she's on fire this year, and that is Jenna Hutchins of Tennessee. So Jenna Hutchins broke the high school cross country record most recently, sub 16 minutes for girls cross country, which is just incredible.
Yeah.
But of course, everyone's always skeptical about things like cross country records because the course matters so much. I mean, you can have a course that's literally, you can have a pavement course in cross country technically and still be legal. But in whatever instance it was, this time she's on the track and proved that she is the one. She has got it. So she just broke Caitlin Toy's 5K track record, previously of 15:37, and now Jenna runs 15:34 for a new track 5K girls record.
Now, I know it's really fast. You can recover there, Zach. Yeah. I will link to how you can watch this. I actually got a chance to watch it, and it's quite amazing.
This one's on YouTube.
Yeah. It's amazing to watch her competing against elites because you can tell she's a high schooler and she just has wheels. It's incredible.
It's amazing. So great things happening across all levels of certainly American and international distance running. But of course, the thing that everyone is always so excited about, the Olympics.
Yes, the Olympics. I did want to mention this. I know it's not the top news that you're going to find on your feed, but the Tokyo Olympics is Tokyo still wants to host it. They have come out and they've announced that they still are planning to host this event.
$100 billion building facilities.
$3.3 billion. Okay.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of money. And 60% of the sponsors are from Japan. They are national sponsors. Mm-hmm. And they have already said that they would spend more or pay more in sponsorship. So it's just amazing the commitment that Japan has to hold this event, and they are thinking through everything, and they've even gone so far as to approach these sponsors about the additional cost. So I just wanted to put that out there in case you're thinking about the Olympics and you're are they going to happen? Are they not? I think it might be an invitation. I mean, the Olympic Committee is going to have to make some decisions, but if each country has to make a decision as well. So Tokyo wants to have it.
and if there is still a final bastion of dignified sports, if you will, at the international level, a thing that has a long-standing tradition that is global and that represents something historic and monumental. It is the Olympics. We know that to be true. And so when you talk about something like, Japan, of course, Tokyo still wants to host the games. Of course they do, because that is a great honor, and because they want to honor and dignify the sports and the athletics world by hosting it and doing a great job at it as well. So we hope they can, and we hope they do. And we'll keep you posted as we learn more things.
Now on to our main topic. Our main topic is, why does nutrition matter for running? And few of you know, very few of you, that I come from the automotive world. And so the concept
so immediately Andy starts talking about cars.
Yes. Food is fuel. You've seen it everywhere. We know this. We know that our body runs on what we feed it. But what can we do to feed it better and to fuel better?
Yeah, so we're talking about the body as a machine, because it is. It's a kind of machine, certainly by the strictest definition of the word. But what we're really seeing is that if we look at, especially as runners, if we look at food with the kind of mindset of fueling the machine properly, then we essentially abide by two principles at all times. The first is that you need certain amounts. You don't want the engine to be empty, and especially with this kind of a machine, over-fueling it is not a great thing. And then also you need certain kinds of things. And so in the same analogy, there's a lot more than just dumping stuff in the gas tank kind of thing going on here. And so when we consider those two things, and most importantly, how much is the right amount, and how do I continue to achieve that day after day, and what are those kinds of things that I specifically need, and in what kinds of amounts under that first principle, this is a complex issue. It is a difficult concept to grasp fully and well, and that is why there are people like Meghann, sports nutritionists, whose entire job is to tell people how to do this well, because it's so complicated and so important. And so doing one thing quickly before the conversation, we do want to at least preface this by saying, when we look at things like what are the things that the body needs, there's a lot of trends within nutrition that are almost never fully based on the science. I didn't say that right. They're almost always not fully based on the science. And so it's important for us to look at a trend in something and ask the question, what is the science here? And what does this have to do with those two principles, getting the right amount and getting the right kinds of things? And so we run that filter and we look at as much as we can with the science. That's why we're bringing you this episode right now, to try to provide more of that concrete information. As a couple quick examples, though, and it was really insightful to me when Meghann says this about, she gave me a new term, macronutrients versus micronutrients. So certainly the carbs, fats, proteins stuff, those are the big categories, and the body does certain things with each one of those. And so as runners, we need those for various kinds of capacities. And then on the micro level, and certain kinds of nutrients involved in the very specific processes and the cell function and all that kind of stuff. It is really fascinating.
It is
to me.
fascinating.
It's really fascinating. But think about things like calcium. So we know we need calcium because of bones and stuff like that, but also with muscles. Calcium helps muscles contract and some general neurological function as well. And in that sense, when you run out of calcium in your muscles, where does it get the calcium? It goes to your bones. We're going to talk about that with Meghann. It's going to be fascinating. Also, things like iron. We hear that so much, like anemia and some of those kinds of things. Well, why is iron important? Because it helps produce and transport hemoglobin, which is the oxygen transporting agent in your blood. So iron helps oxygen get places in your body. That's important. And then, potassium. Everyone always says, get your electrolytes after running. Eat your bananas for the potassium. Well, why is that? Because potassium is one of the chief agents in helping your muscles contract. And if you don't have enough potassium, your muscles can't contract as effectively, meaning they can't do their job well. So that's me just kind of saying, excited. Oh, there's stuff here. Okay, this is really good stuff, but we really need to hear from the expert to get it home.
Absolutely. So Meghann Featherstun of Featherstun Nutrition coming on the podcast. She has her MSRD CSSD, meaning she's got her master's and that she is certified.
That means she's smart.
She's up to date on all the things. She's an expert on this topic, but also is a runner. She's run 2:57 in the marathon, making her a fabulous runner, as well as what she call. She's a self-proclaimed nutrition geek, runner freak, performance fuel for your life. I love it. I love it, Meghann.
And that's important because, as we were saying at the outset, these kinds of things, these questions are answered differently depending on who you are and what you do. And as runners, the answer is different than it might be for someone else.
Exactly. Yep.
So very glad to hear from Meghann.
Hi, Meghann. Welcome to the AtoZrunning Podcast.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, today we're so excited to have you on to talk about nutrition. And we told our audience about you and how you're a super speedy runner too. You've run 2:57 in the marathon and you know all your stuff about nutrition. So we're just going to dive right in. I want to start by asking you some of the mistakes that athletes make with nutrition. And I know that
we
could actually
we don't make mistakes with nutrition, but other people
never.
might.
So some of the mistakes that you often see, and I know this could be like a whole episode just on mistakes, but maybe some of the big ones.
Oof, man. I mean, you're right. We could have an entire episode on mistakes that we make with our nutrition because it's so easy, right? I mean, when we look at like somebody's training plan for running, we run once, maybe twice a day, right? Think how many opportunities we have to eat throughout the day. I mean, I want to say like 6, but more than that, it's probably more like 10, 12, 14, for a lot of people. So, there's a lot of room for error, if you will, within all of those eating occasions, because we have a lot on the daily, right? So I think one of the things that I see the most frequently is not fueling intentionally for your own goals. So we all are different runners. We have different, game plans when it comes to our training. We have different food preferences, different ways we were raised with food, different means to, acquiring food. So it's all too often I see people trying to model their nutrition off of someone else, right? So a lot of times it's level setting, like, wait, let's take a step back. What are your goals? And how do we want to use nutrition to meet those goals within your life? So, that's why I love what I do, because it's very individualized. It's very one-on-one with people to figure out what does that look like, so that we're not necessarily emulating a superstar, right? That we really love and think is fast and great. And, we're really looking at what works for us.
Mm-hmm. I loved a post that you had recently, and I'll link to it, but about bread. And I commented on it because I'm like, thank you for saying this out loud, that white bread is not the worst thing ever. There is a place for it. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with all the runners that I work with, I hear themes over and over and over again. And I think one of those, nutrition misconceptions is that white food is bad, right? White bread, white rice, white pasta, white potatoes, that all those things are terrible for us. When in actuality, as a runner, we need to be really intentional about when we're choosing certain foods. And sometimes the white choices are actually better for us in the long run because they're lower in fiber, they're really high in carbohydrates and a quick carbohydrate, right? So if we're using those simple carbohydrates very intentionally, before long runs, while we're carb loading and don't want that much fiber in our body, it can actually be an asset to our training, not necessarily a quote unquote bad food. So it's really just looking at, when we're eating it, how we're eating it, why we're eating it. And, white bread is fantastic in certain circumstances.
Yeah.
So you're affirming the fact that I eat nothing but bagels and peanut butter for the first half of the day, and that's okay.
I mean, I might try to get a little protein in there for you, for the recovery aspect, but, I'm okay. I'm the bagel queen. So
we should probably at some point say, feel free to tell me point blank anytime that I say something that's completely off and wrong.
Yes.
You should be entirely empowered to do that.
That's so great. So the second part of it kind of leads into it. So we talked about, the quick carbohydrate maybe before a run. So what's great for after a run?
Yeah. So, after a run, we want to really nail that recovery piece. So within recovery, it's recovering our muscles. So what we need for that is the building blocks. So protein. So protein is what we need to get in there to do the job, to actually rebuild those muscles that we've intentionally damaged, right? Because we want them to be stronger. So we need to get in there with that protein to do that. And then the other part of recovery too is restocking those glycogen stores. So glycogen is just the carbohydrates that we store in our muscles, and that's what we pull from as part of our energy during exercise. So as those deplete, we see performance tank, right? So in the second piece of recovery is making sure that we're getting enough carbohydrates into there to help to, replenish those glycogen stores so we're ready, for that next run. So it's kind of a combination of both of those two things. It's, enough protein and enough carbohydrates to really get that, recovery flowing.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard like a certain time frame after you run. Is there a certain time that you think is best for after?
For most people, I tell them if you can get a balanced meal within 90 minutes, you're golden. So, there are clearly some caveats to that. If you're, a 2-a-day runner and you've got to recover really quick to get back out the door, or, you're an athlete in college or something and you've got 2-a-day practices, that's where we want to try to eat as soon as possible. So if we can eat within 30 minutes, research shows that that's a better, strategy. But too often, again, kind of going back to what are some of these mistakes that I see, runners making is I think that recovery window from some research has just been drilled into our heads that we need to eat immediately, right? So what I see happening then is because people are trying to eat immediately, they're grabbing junk, right? And leaving it in their car and just eating that real quick. Whereas, if you have a full 24 hours to recover, I would much rather that you wait a little bit longer and go home and make yourself some good balanced breakfast versus trying to rely on some of this packaged stuff to get in that window,
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes so much sense.
She's just nailing me all over right now. I got to get rid of all my packaged stuff.
No, there's place for
the
that.
first.
Okay.
Yeah. For the first half of the day, I eat nothing but bagels. The second half of the day, I eat nothing but packaged stuff. So
that's not true.
No,
I
really,
cook. In fact,
that's true.
I've cooked some things that you've suggested, Meghann. Actually, that sweet potato lentil soup. Yes, that's a good one. What are some other recipes that you have on your website that I can link to?
That's absolutely one of the most popular. The other ones are the blender muffins. You've probably heard me talk about them before, but I think I have like 5 or 6 different varieties, and they're so easy. Literally, you throw it all into a blender. Now, you do need to have a fairly high-powered blender, or I've heard some complaints that it doesn't work so well. But literally, it's so easy. And then you just dump it into the, muffin tins, bake it, you're good to go. And most of them, they're all whole grains. They've got like sweetened by bananas, so it's some really solid nutrition to go to when, and they taste like fantastic muffins. So those are pretty popular. Yeah.
Awesome. So I'll make sure that I link to that too.
So I'm curious, because one of the things that I'm kind of obsessing over a little bit in terms of food and nutrition right now is trying to better grasp what the specific vitamins, minerals, nutrients that we need for certain kinds of processes for our body. So I know iron does certain things for you and calcium does certain things for you. But I don't know enough to really truly understand what these things do, as much as I know it's probably good to ingest some of those kinds of, you need vitamin D and A is good, and vitamin C, of course, and, all that kind of stuff. But when we think about what a runner does to our bodies, what are the kinds of nutrients, and we can kind of talk about it in two senses here. What are the things that we're probably never getting enough of or very rarely getting enough of and just don't realize it? And what are the things that we really should be thinking about trying to get, some of the essentials there?
Yeah, so I'm going to nerd it out here for a minute. So let's separate this into kind of like 2 different buckets, right? So we have macronutrients and we have micronutrients. So within our macronutrients, that's our carbs, our protein, and our fat. That's what actually provides us with energy. So that's kind of, one topic of conversation. And then I think where you're headed is the micronutrient portion, right? So those are things that don't necessarily provide energy for our body, but they're necessary, right, for us to function as a human. And we need them, obviously, micro in smaller amounts than we would need, our fat, our protein, our carbs. So, both of these buckets, right, play a crucial role in runners' nutrition, because when we think about it, if the average person has iron deficiency or vitamin D deficiency, could they have an issue? Yeah. Could they be symptomatic? Probably, but they're not asking their body to perform in the way that a runner is, right? So what we end up finding is, these mismatches of these micronutrients end up playing a huge role in a runner's performance. So that's why I think it's gotten so much attention. I think first and foremost, as a sports dietitian, we want to take a look at the holistic picture, and I will always focus on those macronutrients first to make sure that someone is meeting overall energy needs first. Because, if you're missing the boat on that, if you're not eating enough carbs, if you're not eating enough total calories, if you're not, getting enough protein, some of the symptoms that can have can actually mimic these micronutrient deficiencies, right? So it's important to make sure that we're assessing like total nutritional intake first. And then once we're like, no, you're nailing that, right? That's when we kind of start looking at those micronutrient deficiencies to try to figure out, okay, like next step, what's going on here? Is something not, adequate in our bodies that's causing us to have X, Y, or Z with our performance?
That is awesome that you just broke that down, because I've never, obviously I'm not very well read on this topic because I have never encountered that specifically. But that key factor then of the hierarchy is important. Emphasize the most important things foremost. So then you run into these situations where, anytime a runner is feeling more tired than usual, they say things like, I must be anemic, or I'm not getting enough vitamin D. And anytime we start to feel like we're getting run down, it's like, oh, my immune system's low, I need more vitamin C, those kinds of things. I've heard a lot of conversation around, runners who get a stress fracture. The immediate thing is you didn't have enough calcium, and, some of that. Play into that a little bit for us. What are these misnomers that people seem to cling to with these things, and what are we getting right or what are we getting wrong?
Absolutely. So, my mind immediately went to stress fracture when you said that, because I've done a lot of work and worked a lot with bone health, right? And a lot of the physicians in our area, really trying to educate them on what's important from a nutritional standpoint and the risk factors for stress fractures in our athletes. And I think calcium, you're right, is the thing that people think of first, is that I'm not getting enough calcium. But when we look at the research and who is getting stress fractures, clearly it's when our vitamin D is too low. When our vitamin D is under like 50, right? A lot of the research shows under 20, that our risk of stress fracture is more than doubled, right? So, that's a really interesting factor for bone health. So anytime I have an athlete that comes to me that has a history of multiple stress fractures, or has one while we're working together, right before we're working together, that's the first thing I say is get your whoever ordered that x-ray, let's get them to order that vitamin D. And every single time it comes back low. So, that's one thing that is slightly preventable. We know stress fractures aren't always preventable, right? There are so many factors that play into people getting them, but one of the things that is actually controllable is making sure that our vitamin D is, within normal range. So that's a piece of it, right? But then the research also looks at calcium. So our bones are majority made out of calcium. And then we also have calcium that kind of hangs out in our blood, right? So it's one of the minerals in our blood that helps with muscle contractions. So our body is really good at keeping our calcium at a certain level, really, really good at it, right? So if we're not ingesting enough calcium on a daily basis, we're pulling it from our bones to maintain that level that our body wants in our blood. So you kind of think of it as a bank, right? So like our bones are a calcium bank. And if we're not taking in enough to maintain those levels in our blood, we end up pulling from our bones, which obviously weakens our bones. So there's certainly research to support that, not eating enough calcium leads to stress fractures as well. So those are the two really big pieces when it comes to nutrition to look at, right? When it comes to stress fractures. And, the other thing that complicates it a little bit is our body can only absorb so much calcium at one time. So we have to kind of spread it out, right? So if you had Greek yogurt and almond milk and, spinach in breakfast in your smoothie, and then you didn't have any calcium the rest of the day, that wouldn't be as good as separating it out and having some of it at breakfast and some of it at dinner.
That's key.
Mm-hmm. So Zach, you can't just take a supplement and then eat.
No, what I'll do is I'll take my supplement pills and I'll just break them into little chunks, and then I'll just keep taking them all throughout the day.
That brings up a good point, though, because a lot of the calcium supplements are only 500 milligrams, and that's what you can absorb. So it's just, for somebody, a lot of the research supports like somebody who has a history of stress fractures, if we have them take calcium 500 milligrams twice a day, opposite ends of the day, and then, a couple thousand IUs of vitamin D with that, that's what has been shown to, be the most beneficial. But yeah, it's just.
I love it. That's very practical.
He's very excited about this.
Very excited
learning
about it.
new things. So Meghann, I'd love to hear maybe like some of the stories of clients, if you're willing to share, just in some of the things that they've worked through with you and how you've seen results.
Mm-hmm. I think, you know, and kind of sticking with this micronutrient deficiency theme here, you know, a huge percentage of my female athletes are iron deficient. And a lot of them know that coming in, which is helpful, right? And we can kind of address it. We can work through it. We can make sure we're testing it and, you know, watching it. But I do have quite a few female athletes that have come to me and, you know, they're nailing everything, right? They're nailing their training, you know, they're doing smart things. I'm tracking nutrition with them, right? I know that they're doing everything right from a nutrition standpoint. We're eating enough, we're eating at the right times, we're eating, you know, recovery nutrition is on point, and they are just not improving. They are just, their paces aren't improving, you know, their running feels so hard, you know, that's just too much effort. And, you know, I've had 3 or 4 clients over the past couple of months, and it's just this like ding, 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 kind of like this light goes off. And it's just like, you know, we've nailed everything. This has got to be iron. Like, please go get your iron tested. Right. So we have them go, I tell them exactly what to ask their doctor for. They go through, you know, one of the companies that'll do it online for you. And, you know, sure enough, their ferritin comes back and it's in the toilet, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So for a female, for all runners, not just female, we want to see ferritin over 40. So when they're coming back with an 18 or a 12, or I had one that was 7, you know, no wonder, right? Because when we don't have enough iron in our body, we're not carrying oxygen to our muscles to be able to perform. So, you know, these athletes are putting in so much time and effort to their training and their nutrition, and yet they're not reaping any of the benefits because their iron's low, you know. And not that it's an easy fix. It takes weeks to get your iron back up, you know, but at the same time, if we can fix that, we see huge performance gains from it. And I think, you know, that's one of the biggest things, truthfully, that I see coming through with a lot of my female athletes is just maybe there isn't awareness of that concept yet, and how much improvement can come when we do start to see those levels, you know, tick up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's always a frustration. You know, you work with these people, so you know that period of time where it's like, what is wrong? Because clearly, you know, it's not something I'm doing wrong that's making me feel this way. So then that realization, you know, we found the thing that's missing kind of thing.
Right.
I think the tragedy there is how often people will spend such a long period of time in that unknowing area where something's clearly wrong, but they're not doing enough or not going the right direction to try to resolve it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, you know, a lot of this comes back to, I know physical therapy has worked for me in the past. So that's the place I go when I think that something's wrong with whatever it is. You know, I know this particular coach has helped me with something in the past. So I go talk to that person. But if we're not taking the full balanced approach, looking at all spheres, looking at the training, looking at the nutrition, looking, you know, all of those things. And that's huge. We talk a lot with our runners about general health and wellness as one of the key foundations to thriving as a runner. And there's so many things that contribute to that. Obviously we're talking right now about nutrition, which is one aspect of general wellness, but we have to attend to all of those things in order to really, truly be able to thrive in the endeavors here. So this is huge.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
It is.
So I want to talk about some of your own running and maybe some of your own experience and how you kind of juggle, you know, working and running and your own nutrition. What does it look like for you, Meghann?
That's a good question. I mean, you know, it changes over the life cycles. I mean, speaking of ferritin, after I had my second kid, I had 2 C-sections. So I had like a decent amount of blood loss, but my ferritin was 17, you know, when I was starting to train again. And I remember how terrible I felt. How it felt like you were sucking wind, right? You know, and did everything I could to turn it around. So I think sometimes it's like, I can channel, like, I remember how terrible that felt. And you can empathize with your athletes, right? I think, as you guys know, as coaches, empathy is one of the key factors of being a successful coach, however you're coaching, you know? So I think sometimes those shared experiences really allow you to understand those athletes, you know, a little bit more. You know, but from, you know, a daily basis, I mean, I've done a lot of stupid nutrition things in my life, right? Before I was a sports dietitian. Again, I think that's how we learn. You know, I think we're our own best guinea pigs, and hopefully we try things that work and we don't end up, injured or anything like that. And I truly consider myself that, as soon as I read new research or something, I'll be the first one to try it before I'll recommend it for someone else, to really understand how that feels, what that's like, how to incorporate things into that. Before I kind of took this route and became a sports dietitian, I had thought about going back to school and getting my PhD in exercise physiology. And this was, when was this? 2009, I think. And I was convinced that I wanted to study that, train low, run high concept, right? So that whole glycogen depleted concept. And so I, took myself out on long runs, completely glycogen depleted, and got lost, felt terrible, realized like your brain doesn't function well like that, and again, and then I was like, well, maybe I don't want to study that. But I think sometimes it's trying these things on our own to figure out, what works and what doesn't work. And kind of back to nutrition mistakes that I see people making. And one of the biggest things I see people doing is under fueling all day and then literally just going nuts at night. Right. And there's not enough willpower to ever overcome hunger. Right. So if we let ourselves get too hungry by the evening, all bets are off. We're going to eat anything we can get our hands on. Right. And I think, early on in my running career, 10, 12 years ago, I was the poster child for that. Like I just got busy and wasn't super hungry all day. And then at night would just eat way too much. And then you wake up the next morning and you're not hungry, and things like that. So, that's one thing that I have changed dramatically in my nutrition, since I've had kids and started running a little bit more intensely is, we have to fuel around our activity. So take a look at when you run, right? I run really early in the morning. So I get up in enough time to have some coffee and eat a little something and get out the door and then come home, and breakfast is my biggest meal, because the energy was expended here. So we need to fuel harder here, right? Versus waiting to fuel later. So, I think that's kind of my biggest philosophy with my own nutrition, and that I try to help, runners with, is let's take a look at when are we expending the most energy, and let's make sure that's surrounded by the most nutrition in our day. So for me, that's morning. For some people, that's evening. For some people, that's lunch, so it's kind of different for everybody. But that's a concept that I think isn't necessarily intuitive for a lot of us, because usually when we're done running, we're not super hungry, right? I mean, running for most people is an appetite suppressant. So it's kind of, we have to be thinking about, okay, this is really important for my progress to make sure that I'm eating here, and be really intentional about that. And I think that's the biggest thing that's changed with my own nutrition over the years, is just that intentionality of, all right, maybe I'm not hungry for X, Y, or Z, or maybe I don't feel like I need that right now, but I know I do, right? I know what my body needs. So let's just do it. And, it ends up really controlling the eating for the rest of the day in a very positive way.
Yeah. So our relationship with food, like how we view it, its potential to help us, all of those things seem to be important factors. When you dive in with your clients, is that part of the discussion? Like what's the relationship with food? Because I think with a lot of runners, it can be like, I just don't feel like eating, or there is even weight things like, I have my race weight, or all these things like hovering around food, which is not so simple. Like it should be just science, right? But it's not. It's like emotional. And there's so much that's part of it.
Yeah. And nutrition is so emotionally driven, right? We can't separate out, emotion from nutrition. Very few people can anyways. And that's fine. Right. I mean, we use nutrition for everything in our lives. We use it to celebrate. We use it to mourn. We use it, every single emotion we have been ingrained in over our lives to use food for that. So we can't, ignore that that's not a part of the process. And, to your comment, there's a huge, incidence of disordered eating, maybe not all the way to a eating disorder, right? But just disordered eating, disordered thoughts around nutrition and running. So, that's always something that I'm listening for as soon as I hear people talking about food. And I think, any trained sports dietitian is going to be able to pick up on little nuances of the conversation to be able to understand, is this something that we need to, be questioning out out front, right? Or something we just need to kind of keep in the background that we keep our eye on. And I think, it's always something that needs to be part of the thought process of planning nutrition, right? Is kind of understanding that relationship with nutrition, because I runner or not runner, right? The world that we live in, it's got some very disordered thoughts and eating habits out there that it's just really hard not to absorb.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my last question, maybe Andy still has others, but my last question at the moment is pre-race breakfast. Okay. So I like doing this to people because people often chagrin at me, if that's a thing you can verb. But I don't know how you will react. So you can react to my thought, but I'm actually curious what you would recommend to many in this kind of a situation. Pre-race food. So thinking about a marathon, early morning marathon. So I'm going to wake up a couple hours before to eat something. I always do. I know some don't, but my preferred breakfast before any race, but definitely before a marathon,
to me, P.S.
is well, specifically, I'll be very precise, is the McDonald's bacon, egg, and cheese bagel breakfast sandwich. That is my pre-race breakfast.
Did you see me cringe a little there?
A little bit, yeah.
I mean, that would never be my recommendation. I'm not going to lie. But if it works for you, that's what's important. Like, we have to try our pre-race nutrition out and see what works for us. And when we find what works for us, as long as it's giving us enough food, we stick with it, right? So, from my sports nutrition lens right here, when you say, the bagel, I'm assuming it's got cheese and bacon and some other high fat meat on it. So fat slows our emptying of our stomach. So I would expect for some people that would be a recipe for like GI cramps or distress, because the food is hanging out in our stomach longer than just a bagel on its own. Do you know what I mean? So I would never recommend that, but if that's something that works for you, I'm not going to mess with that. Like if that works, like let's rock it. Right. At least we got some carbs in there.
Oh my goodness.
It's wonderful.
I cringe
it's
every
really
time, like every single time. He's like, you want me to pick you up one? I'm like, no, because
Nope.
I would have an issue, like a pretty serious one. Even oatmeal, like, well, I know it's a completely different reason, but yeah, everyone has their own thing. Like I do see a lot of like athletes, like high-end athletes that will do oatmeal. I just can't do that. Like every time.
I couldn't even handle a banana. Yeah. Nope. White bagel. Yep. That's all we got.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much more that we could talk about. I'm serious. Like we could talk all night, but you have your family to get back to, and obviously people can connect with you. So we'll link to all the ways to do that. What's your favorite place to hear from people?
Probably Instagram. That's where I am.
Instagram?
The most. Yeah.
Okay.
They can email me too. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Meghann. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for not shaming me too much during this time.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you to Meghann for that enlightening conversation.
Yes, and for not embarrassing me too much in front of you, our beloved audience. Now you know, though, some of my faults, because I was not exaggerating. As Andy has recently pointed out, I do basically eat almost nothing but bagels and peanut butter for the first half of the day.
And that's not for not knowing.
No, it's because I like them and because it's easy fuel for my run. It feels good. I can eat a bagel with peanut butter as I'm running and feel great. It's just one of those things. So, of course, I tend to eat that before I run, every day.
And she says that you can eat that before you run. She affirmed that.
Yes, it is good pre-run fuel.
Yeah.
But maybe not the only thing I should eat the whole day.
No.
With my bacon, egg, and cheese bagel.
Bacon, egg. Which they don't make anymore. Are you sad about that?
I know. We're moving on.
Moving on to what I learned, and what I think is very interesting is that Meghann had mentioned that a lot of us focus on the micronutrients and thinking that we might be deficient in something before looking at the macros.
Yeah.
Some of us don't get enough carbs. Not Zach. Zach gets plenty of carbs.
It might be
some of
too
us
much.
might be feeling fatigued because we're not getting enough carbohydrates, which would be easier access for our bodies for our runs. So looking at those macros, and it is a lot. It's a lot of science. So that's why there are experts, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast. So if you would like to connect with Meghann, you can go to AtoZrunning.com/episode 63. Or you could go to her website, which is featherstonenutrition.com. So I'll link to her Instagram and then, of course, her website. So it's been a pleasure getting to know Meghann and learning from her.
And as you might guess, if you need the whole package, if you want someone to help support you in your running goals and help you thrive as a runner, that's what we do.
Yeah.
And so certainly head to AtoZrunning.com/coaching. And the best part about it is if we don't know the answer to your questions, if we can't help specifically with a thing on your mind, we go find the people who know it.
Yeah.
And we bring that to you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.